Hello, it's December 6, 2022, still 2022. It's a SIG Node Sidecar working group. We are here to discuss Sidecar's proposal and how it will look like. Just a small recap. We had 2 meetings already. You can find these meetings in this agenda doc with the recording links. And on these meetings, we discussed what ideas were proposed before and was rejected. Also, we do discussing what properties the idea of having group of containers called init, like pre-init containers, or some other name, will satisfy, and we decide that it will satisfy most of the scenarios, if not all the scenarios. So now, on this meeting, we wanted to speak a little bit about YAML and how this can be expressed in YAML. And one idea was to discuss each property of containers and decide whether this property is only applicable to sidecar or mostly applicable to sidecar, so it can be applicable to everything. And in YAML, correspondingly, we either need to have this property universally applied or applied specifically for sidecars, or even be implied by having the sidecars. But I think all these questions, Matthias, you can take it away, and yeah, maybe you can give another introduction. If there is any questions, on the phone, you can that you want to ask now, please do. Otherwise, I will go ahead and pass it to Matthias. No, okay, Matthias, take it away.
Yes. Okay. So it's a bit of a reflection that we had first with Ramya and then with Tim. So we were thinking about how it should look like in the podspec YAML. So first idea would be like, can you go to slide 2? Like we define sidecars as another list of containers called, let's call it sidecar for the moment. So like a pod would look like this. So let's say we have an init container which gets some secrets from Vault. Then we have one sidecar. And then you have like the normal containers. So Istio sidecar in this case. So as you can see, and this is detailed in the next slide, but I think I can comment while we have this one on screen. Let me just see my notes. So yeah, so yeah, maybe you can just display this page and I will read. So basically, it's just another slice of containers. So they should start before the main containers and possibly before the init containers. They can have their own life cycle. So this is mostly via the restart policy that is specified in the sidecar. And the idea is the order of this list defines the starting order. And this order is reversed for the stopping order. So yeah, that's the proposal. So then we said, maybe, you know, sidecar is not a good word. So let's try to find a more generic name. So if you go to slide 4, then we take the decision to call them XXX containers because we already have init containers. So maybe we have like XXX containers. That's the only difference. Then we can take this ID further and say, how would it look like with a job? So that's the next container. So here for a job, you can see normally we have an implicit restart policy for the whole pod to never. And then we still have our XX container with the restart policy always. So as we mentioned before, if when the job is done, then regardless of the sidecar should run all the time, the pod will be terminated and it will go to the reverse order of the starting. Now let's have a bit of a recap on the next slide. to compare the three different list of containers now that we have in the pod spec. So for the restart policy, the init container, the implicit restart policy is always on failure, and it cannot be changed. Whereas the restart policy of all containers in the pod spec, they can be always on failure or never, and they are inherited for the pod restart policy. And normally they cannot be changed. And now the one for the sidecars, it's explicit. And depending on the usage, we can set it to always or on failure. And then this translates to the order when we start them. So init containers, they should start before containers, and they run to completion before we start the containers. The containers, depending if they have never or on failure, they will stop the pod on completion. And the sidecars, they should also start before the containers, but their life cycle does not cause the end of the pod. So now if we take some specific part of this page and we highlight them in the next one. So we squint a little bit. So I don't know if it's, you see the bold a bit? So highlighted is like on failure for init containers and sidecar containers, and also the property that they should start before the main containers. So what we see is that it's equivalent to have sidecar containers and restart policy on failure equals init containers, because they are basically the same. And if we just take an init container and put it in the list of sidecars, no, please, it will be equivalent if we just look at this page. And now if we squint a little bit, there is a question.
Hey, Matthias, this is Neeraj. So,
Hey.
So what would be the behavior if an XXX container, it doesn't start? Will the pod restart, or it will have no impact on the pod? I just want to clarify.
I would say, like, for an init container, it should restart the pod if there is a failure on the startup of the sidecar container.
Got it. Yeah, thank you.
But you could have your own opinion, right?
Yeah, actually, I want, I mean, I would prefer that behavior because in our production deployment, the workloads what we have Istio container, which kind of proxies all the outgoing API connection. So I'm just correlating to that. So if that sidecar it doesn't come up, the pod actually essentially it can't do anything. So I would actually really prefer that behavior. If the sidecar doesn't come up, the pod should actually restart. Thanks.
Yes. Okay. So we are aligned. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So now if we squint a little bit more on next slide, we could, and this is Tim's idea actually when we were discussing. If you move the restart policy to the other side of the equal sign, if we take an init container and put it as a restart policy always, it's equivalent to a sidecar. So yeah, so if you compare to the other slide, it's just we moved away, we exchange init containers and sidecars. Okay, is it clear what I mean? So the conclusion would be, but we need to refine and make sure it works, that sidecars are just init containers that always restart. That's the proposal for the moment. But then, of course, we have like many questions to ask ourselves and to answer. Like, so these was questions from Tim. So at the moment when we were discussing, we said, okay, yeah, we have this XXX container. Do we want to deprecate init containers and just use those ones? What I'm proposing is actually the opposite. we should keep init containers and just enrich them. Then, yeah, all sorts of questions regarding life cycle of a container inside the pod. How do we, do we need more guarantees for ordering? Or because one drawback is that since we use the ordering of the list, it's not easy to insert something in the middle of the list. You could easily put it at the end of the list or at the beginning, but in the middle, it's more difficult when you want to add sidecars at admission. And then I have also some open questions from my side on the next slide. Yeah, so one question like Sergey might have, because it was his KEP at some point, how does it differ from the per container restart policy? So it's mostly the same idea, but I applied it to init containers instead of containers. So we have this strong isolation between the main container and the sidecar and the init containers. And we make sure that everything is set up before we even start the real workload of the pod. Then we need to sort out what to do with the lifecycle handlers. If there are some special cases to handle. And yeah, how do we make sure we can tweak the grace period? Do we need one per container and then we add them, or I don't know. This is like open questions. So that's it for the moment.
Hi, this is Joe. I really like the one property of this latest design is that you don't add yet another class of containers, which means that our discovery endpoints won't have like an explosion of YAML, which is kind of a problem, right? Like if you go and look, we already have like ephemeral containers and init containers and containers, and they're also all are very large when you look at like their open API. So I do like that we're not expanding that further. That seems to be a really nice property of this design.
Yeah, that was the goal. If we can make it working. So I didn't figure all the cases, and we've team just planted the seeds, and now we need to explore if it's doable.
Yeah, one interesting side effect would be if there are any controllers that calculate resource usage themselves instead of relying on Kubernetes, and they will need to understand that restart always init containers should be accounted for duration of a pod lifecycle.
True. Do we take notes in the? Do you want me to take notes or?
Yeah, we can all take notes. I think.
Yeah. There's, I don't think this is a showstopper, but something we're going to have to consider before building this fully is there's going to be a version skew problem where when you first introduce this feature, versions of the system that don't know about this new field are going to probably accidentally treat these new init containers as normal init containers because they won't realize that always is a thing.
Or maybe even fail parsing the YAML. I haven't tried. What happens with existing
if
releases?
It's just like a new field, usually what happens is it gets ignored. So we might have to think a little carefully about that. I'm willing to also help try and think about that. I don't think it's a showstopper. I think if that's the only problem, we should just find a way to cope with it. But we will want to have a plan.
Any more comments on this design? Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, so right now, if we could go back to the slide deck, and I think slide 10 or 9, maybe slide 9. So right now, init containers only, the regular containers don't start until after all the init containers run to completion.
Yeah, this is the big semantic difference.
Right. And so what semantic are we going to use for the init containers where how do the regular containers know when to start if the init containers are still running?
So it's when they are ready. So that's what I think. So if we have the implicit restart policy to never, then we wait until they complete. And if it's always, we wait before they are ready and then we continue. But to be discussed.
Okay. I think we'll want to solidify that.
This will be the hardest part to explain to users, I think. Is, you know, like we're actually changing the semantic, and so, you know, exactly what that criteria is going to be really subtle.
Yeah, if we could document and make sure that we have test cases for this.
It's also interesting that you can now, compared to the previous one where we had an explicit sidecar container, you can now interleave normal init containers with sidecar init containers.
Yes.
So you could have like one init container, and then after that you could have a sidecar one. Then you could have another normal init. I think that's fine. It's just going to start them in the right order, and then you're not going to progress to the normal containers until all sidecar containers are ready. But it's something that this design allows.
Yes, absolutely. That's one good idea. One good part of this one. You can really, if you need like the vault to be run before you start Istio, and then if you need to retrieve, I don't know, another certificate through Istio for your normal application, then you can do the ordering as you said.
Yeah, I actually think that's a pro when it comes to composability. There are certain things that I think people wouldn't have been able to do it the other way that they'll be able to do. I can't think of exactly what they'll be, but you can imagine people have like steps they want to do in between.
I wonder if we can be smart and suggest some way to fit this new design into old design. So like let's maybe create fake real containers that doesn't take any resources, but helps with accounting of resources somehow. For transition stage, it may be a good idea to be able to express this somehow. So let's say I have a fake container that is defined, but Kubernetes wouldn't even take it into account, and it will just ignore it because it knows that it's only taking resources for new init containers.
There is a question in the chat from Howard. Can init containers have probes? Probably yes. They are just a regular container in the list, no?
Yeah, I think they're going to need them.
Oh yeah. We need them, but I don't know if
them, but can they today? I'll try it out actually. Let's not guess.
I would say I
asking.
think yeah they are both the list of the same container object, so I think you can put them. Maybe they are ignored, but
yeah, were you thinking of the more general question of like, what are the differences today between init containers and normal containers, and which of those make sense and don't make sense for sidecars? That's actually a really good thing to review.
Yeah, I was just worried. Yeah, it's actually rejected. It is in like the spec, like if you keep go to explain, it shows up, but there's some, I don't know, project that rejects it. No probes in init containers. So I think that's fine. Like we can probably just say that if the restart policy is always or whatever, then probes are allowed. Otherwise, they're not allowed. It's just something we'll need to take in mind. That also means we'll probably, you know, it's some implementation work to make it work. But
so I'm not sure it's the kubelet that it's rejecting them now. It's a controller, no? What did you say?
Yeah, it's
Howard?
yeah. API server rejects it. So, but we may also need work in kubelet to allow. Well, I don't know. Well, I mean, we'll need plenty of work to make this actually work. So we'll just need to keep that in mind.
Mhm. Are there any, I'm sorry, I don't know kubelet very well. Are there any concerns around ordered shutdown that we're trying to achieve here?
I think ordered shutdown will only apply to the special containers. Ambient.
That's right. Yeah, and we think that's achievable. Like, I guess if something doesn't want to shut down, eventually it's going to be killed, and then we would move on to the next one.
Yeah, we need to think about extended graceful termination, graceful period, because we don't have it now. Today we just send SIG term to everything.
Okay.
Yes, in that so in that case, we need to sequence this shutdown and ensure we honor the graceful period for each.
Currently, the pod gets the SIG term and not the individual containers. And so this might be problematic to send them to specific containers.
I don't know this code. Maybe.
Yeah, that's how it currently works. The whole pod gets a SIG term, which usually gets relayed to all the containers by cryo or containerd.
Okay. That's really good to know.
Well, I mean, in case of graceful termination, we first kill like terminate regular containers and then system containers. So we have a way to distinguish somehow.
Yeah, but does that mean that this might mean there's changes to the cryo interface in worst case, or do you think we can get away with not doing that?
I think if we assume that all pods or all containers within the pod are getting the SIG term for a graceful shutdown, that's okay. But splitting it up to individual containers, we should probably avoid.
Okay. So we might want to think about what we're going to commit to there. We know we want to have an ordered startup, but oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, I know that Lyft made a patch that they use annotations for this, and they do ordering shutdown where basically the sidecars get shut down after the I haven't looked at the code to double check how they did it. I don't think they made any changes to the interface. I think it was more changes to the kubelet, but there could be some ideas there.
Okay.
One small exercise I propose is to go back into this list of properties and rehash it really quickly, whether this design works for all the properties. Okay, so do not block pod termination. I think this is interesting that one property restart always have so many semantic now. So this is also a semantic for restart always, right? It's a new semantic that is controlled by restart policy, which is not super ideal, but this is what we want to do, right? We will not block pod termination. Yeah, can start before in containers. This is taken into account very, like, this works perfectly in this situation. Restart behavior can be different from pod restart policy. Yes, this is exactly what we indicate with this flag. So basically, this and like item requirement number 2 and requirement number 3 taken care of perfectly. Semantically different enough to allow future scope and expansion. We've been talking about some resources isolation and security isolation. I think since they are in init containers, place. So init containers are special enough from regular containers that we can take into account some advanced resource isolation for them. We've been discussing that other types of isolation is not very significant. But again, they're in init container stage, so they separate enough from regular containers. Establish pattern to follow. Yeah, no pod bloating. This is good. Sidecar can reliably be injected by webhooks. I think this also, right? If sidecar doesn't have any dependencies, it can go just to be first init container. If you shy enough, you can go last init containers, and you'll be taken care of. Termination ordering. Yeah, we've been discussing that we need to have more this specific design, but I think this can be taken care of. They're special enough. Okay, so I think all the requirements are satisfied. I will only a little bit concerned about this requirement. It's strange that restart always will also make them not block the pod termination.
Yeah, that is a little surprising. You're saying something's always going to run, but it's okay to terminate it under certain conditions.
Do we ever need this property that something is not blocking pod termination for other containers? In other words, do we need another property that indicates that?
I was wondering if maybe always isn't quite the right word, but I didn't want to bike shed on what exactly to call it. I mean, logically, I think we could probably come up with an identifier.
Maybe ambient?
Yeah, I think brainstorming on just words like that is a good idea.
Ambient. It is not a good sign.
I like words like ambient because if you're not sure what it means, you know to go look at the docs, and the docs will tell you exactly what it means. Kind of like the word pod, right? Like it doesn't really mean anything separate from what we define it to mean.
Yeah. Any other suggestions what restart policy value may be for this kind of behavior? Background.
I was thinking of background or sidecar. Sidecar is probably a little too opinionated, but background's nice.
Any Latin words for background or ambient?
Just thinking of like supportive
Or
or
maybe
assistant
Greek.
or something like that.
Greek. Oh, Sunny, thank you for the link. I will link it here.
I think that's a good one. The only other one that I was thinking about when I saw this design is the future proofing. We're going to be having to co-evolve init containers and sidecar containers. So any fields that we add are going to either have to make sense for both, or we're going to have to like explicitly have like validation rules that say you can only use this field if restart policy is set to X on something. And then also, is this going to be an immutable field? I didn't see that listed anywhere, but we might want to take a stance on that.
What do you mean by immutable?
Like once you set it, you can't change it. Like once you set up a pod, then this is kind of locked in stone. If all of the init containers are immutable, I guess you get that transitively, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, and if you mistakenly apply this field to regular init container, then you kind of screw it, right? So it will keep restart the same container and will keep trying to initialize things.
Yeah. That might be a good reason to give it a very explicit restart policy name, so that like you don't accidentally set it not realizing that it has very special semantics.
Okay, I think we went through all agenda. Is there more comments about it? More proposals or anything?
What about the pre-stop hooks? Do we need to change something to account for those ambient containers, or?
What do you mean? Terminate, like how to handle termination properly?
No, it's like today we have those lifecycle hooks that, and maybe it's not relevant for ambient container, but
I think it is relevant. It just we need to define exactly how graceful period will work for these containers and what we can commit and what we want to commit on. So typically, when we stop container, we execute pre-stop hook first, and then once it's and start a timer. If pre-stop completed, then we will just terminate the pod, and if not, then I mean we will terminate it anyway when timeout is reached, right? So if we do sequencing here, one question would be, do we add up all the graceful termination periods for all the ambient containers, so we do something else? So I think one big open question is spell out exactly the termination, how termination will work.
Yeah, I agree with that. We need to figure out the termination policy on the pod.
I believe in that even if you just simply apply, like simply make it work as it works today with regular containers, then it will be good enough for majority of scenarios. If you can make it better, it will be even, I mean, it will be great. So I think we have an opportunity to make it better, but I'm not sure we want to block on making it like make explicitly like some improvements here. Because extended graceful termination and sequencing of termination can be applied more broadly than just ambient containers.
who wants to take this point?
I don't know Node as well as I should, but I'm willing to try and make a dent in that. This is Joe Betts. Oh, probably ask for help for some people.
Are you able to join next week meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So I think other thing we can do is to just write down all we discussed in these 3 meetings and say that we almost came up to this final proposal, and this is something that we need to collect like last objections for this design, if there are any. I think we went through all the requirements so many times that this is what we can and should implement. I can spell it out and try to get writing out. Okay. Yeah, if you'll spell out all the termination work and make sure that we know how it works, we will collect last objections, and if there will be no objections, then I think it's good enough for a cap for 127.
That's great.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can finish this meeting today earlier, taking 20 minutes back. If there are any last comments, please go ahead and say something.
Maybe you can just include the link from Sunny in the chat for the lift patch.
Yeah, I already put it here.
Ah, sorry, I didn't notice. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.